wants to kick it off?
I can kick it off real quick.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead.
Destiny, would you agree with me that the motivation for demonizing the opposition political party often revolves around calling them traitors, accusing them of treason, and pushing for some type of villainization that they are against the country, they are against you, they are against everybody?
For another debate, maybe, but that's not at all any of the subject matter here.
Well, I think it is. I think it ties in because I believe that the motivation for why you're claiming that the other side are a bunch of insurrectionists, though you have no direct evidence of this, and your own criteria is just that of basically a riot, that your motivation is just to demonize the opposition.
Sure, but this isn't a debate over my motivation. I could be motivated by 100 million different bad faith factors, and literally none of them would be relevant to this conversation. It could be the fact that the DNC actually paid me money to give this precise argument, and Kamala's on the phone with me right now, and it wouldn't have any impact on this particular debate.
I think it would be. I think that the motivation for why you're making the argument itself would have an impact on the debate. But I am willing to concede that if you just want to keep it to the material, we can. Let's move over to point 2 then. Point 2, you say resisting any law or interference with the course of a government proceeding wouldn't fit rioting itself. How does that not fit rioting itself? Of course it does.
Well, let's say, for instance, the purpose of a riot was because you felt like the law wasn't being enforced. It wouldn't make sense to call that part of an insurrection. Let's say, for instance, that let's say that there was a lynching of a person and you felt like the cops weren't, upholding their duty or whatever. And so you decided to have a protest that turns into a riot, and you all show up with the goal of protesting and rioting because you felt like the law wasn't being carried out here. You wouldn't really call that an insurrection because they're not trying to contravene a legal process. Just because, again, you engage in unlawful conduct doesn't mean that you're trying to resist, like the implementation of the carrying out, resisting the laws.
That would be the same case with insurrection then. Insurrection would also require intent, right?
Yes. Yeah, correct. Yes. So the intent would be the contravening of the Electoral Count Act. When people say we need to march and make our voices heard on January 6th to the Capitol grounds where people are going to protest, they're protesting the execution of the Electoral Count Act, which demanded that Vice President Pence count the electoral votes. Donald Trump didn't want that. He made it very clear in the days preceding. Him, Bannon, Eastman, Chesbrough, and everybody else that was working alongside him, Sidney Powell, everybody else, was saying that we need to prevent Pence from counting the electoral vote. That was the execution of a lawful government function.
Yeah, but even if
an act, and that's what people are going there to protest
but even
against.
if all that's true, Destiny, it still wouldn't matter because the events of January 6th themselves, the intent of the people could have just been to riot, not indeed to commit to any sort of treasonous insurrection activity. And you have failed to demonstrate this time and time again, how this actually would meet the criteria of an insurrection. Them showing up, and just like your take in 2021, right? When you say, hey, look, the damage would have been way worse if they had shown up with the purposes of actual insurrection or some type of 1776 mindset. This is the most armed nation on planet Earth. How in the world can you say these people showed up specifically in order to do that? That makes no sense, man.
None of this law, none of that argumentation was stuck with her. People they obviously showed up to protest the certification of the vote. They were called there by Donald Trump.
If it's a non sequitur, then you in 2021 were using a non sequitur when you made the argument that from the appearance of this, it could not have been an insurrection.
2021 Destiny was incorrect because 2021 Destiny didn't have the historical context to understand an insurrection. If you want to bring him on here and talk to him, you can.
I am talking
agree with
to him.
everything that
You're
I said.
not
You're
you.
not. I am 2024 Destiny. I have learned more things. I have done more studying. I've read more papers, and I've done more research on this. There is actually a strong understanding of what an insurrection is, and there was a strong historical understanding of what an insurrection is. And the idea that a bunch of people were called on January 6th, the date wasn't a mistake. When Donald Trump sent them down there to protest, when he said we need Mike Pence to do the right thing, what was he talking about? He wanted him to contravene the law, and that's what people marched down there for him to do.
Donald Trump said 30 minutes before this began that this needed to remain a peaceful protest on Twitter.
No, he didn't. He never said that.
He did. I actually have the tweet.
Didn't.
I have the tweet. He did say that.
In the speech, he said to fight like hell, and in the speech, he said that we need to go down.
I'm talking about his tweets. Why would a person put out a tweet to be peaceful if their intent was insurrection, Destiny?
Why would a person call a protest on January 6th? What do you think they were protesting?
What do you mean? They call protest. People call protests all the time. That doesn't mean that the
We're not talking about other protests. I'm asking you, what was the purpose of the protest on January 6th?
The purpose of the protest was to go out and show support for Donald J. Trump.
For what?
Well, there was a variety of reasons. I think.
No, wait. Are you telling me we can't?
I'm going to give you a variety of reasons. You can't say no. Are you saying there wasn't a variety of reasons why people didn't show up?
Nope. I think there was one clear reason.
Oh, there's only one reason why everybody showed up.
10 seconds.
Correct.
10 seconds.
Okay. What is the one clear reason? There was not a variety of reasons. Some people didn't show up just because they wanted to see what was happening. Some people didn't show up just to support the president. Some people didn't show up because they really like to go to protest.
That's time.
Everybody showed up for one reason, right?
I didn't say everybody showed up for one reason. I said they were called there for one reason, and that was to protest the certification of the election.
Guys, that is time. I'm happy to let this play out longer if you guys want, and add an extra minute to the clock. Are you guys okay with that?
Yeah, we can add an extra
I'll
minute.
add an extra minute to the
that.
clock, and this is still round one of the open discourse, but just try to limit it to 1 minute, and then we'll go into round two of it, and we can go from there. And if we need more rounds at the 5 minute mark, we can absolutely do that. So
I have a problem with him ascribing motivation to all. He says there's one clear reason why everybody showed up. That's clearly not true. That doesn't even logically make sense. He could never demonstrate in a million years that there was only one clear reason why everybody showed up. That's a nonsensical argument, Destiny.
That's not the argument that I'm making. If the debate is whether or not January 6th is an insurrection, not did every single person on January 6th engage in the crime of insurrection, or did every single person on January 6th go with the intent to commit an insurrection. Why did you say there was one clear reason? I said that there was a clear reason why people were called there, because there was. Donald Trump called people there to protest not on January 5th and not on January 7th and not in a random part of D.C. and not in a random part of the country. He called them on January 6th to the ellipses that was less than a mile walk away from the Capitol building, which is where he sent every single person after his speech. He called them there on the day of the certification of the vote.
That doesn't tell us their motivation.
Trying to pressure Pence to overturn the election.
That doesn't tell us their motivation.
That they need to go on protest for the lawful slates of electors to be counted, the illegitimate ones that he submitted, and people went there.
Even if I grant your logic,
violent behavior, and they managed to delay the certification of the election, which is exactly. So then, do you admit then that
no, I don't admit anything. Even if I grant your logic,
they happen to do every single thing that an insurrection called for without actually engaging in an insurrection.
Guys, give me a chance to respond.
Real fast.
I not only do I concede nothing, but your logic.
We ran out of time on that round. So what I'll do is this. I can see that this is a dynamic conversation, and clearly it's going to go out the bounds sometimes of a time round. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and set the clock for 10 minutes. That completes round one of the open discourse, but I see that this is a dynamic argument, and me just stopping it randomly at 5 minutes would probably be stupid. So I'm going to let it play out. I'll put 10 minutes on the clock and have you guys go at it. Is that okay with both of you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Destiny, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, because I don't want to interrupt you guys again like that, so I'll just go ahead and put 10 minutes on the clock, and I will start it right now. You guys, you can pick right off where you left off, Andrew. Yeah. Sorry about that.
So to respond, right, and I'll be more charitable with the time back your way now that we have 10 minutes, Destiny, but it's actually an illogical argument to make, to say, even if Donald Trump had some certain intent in his head, that would not mean that the people who were showing up for the protest had that intent. So the thing is like, for both ways, it's a double entendre for your own logic. Either one, you claim, wait a second, there's one clear reason everybody showed up, or two, no, there was no clear reason why everybody showed up. They had multiple motivations, even if Trump himself had a different motivation. This is illogical argumentation.
I'm sorry, but this would never be applied to anything. If somebody says, hey, guys, we're all going to show up.
That's not an argument either.
And I'm making the argument right now. If somebody were to make the call and say, hey, guys, we're all going to show up to go and blow this building up, and a bunch of people showed up, and then a bunch of them marched for the crowd, and then they all went, and a building got blown up, we wouldn't say, like, oh, well, we don't know what the intention of the crowd was. We don't know what the intention of the leader there was. We don't know what actually happened there, because we can't divine the intention of every single individual person.
That's a ridiculous straw man.
We can say you can call it a straw man, but the idea that in order for me, okay, hold on. What would I need to show?
Hang on, let me respond to your first argument.
Wait, hold on. What would I need to show?
Wait, no, there's no spurting. Let me respond to the argument.
But you're not even letting me talk. You can respond to my argument. You can phrase
you made an
argument.
Let me respond, and then you can ask the second argument. I think that's fair. So when you're talking about this from a logical standpoint, when you say, oh, if somebody called and said, hey, we're all going to blow this building up, yes, I would agree that you could probably ascribe the motivation to it then. Can you show me a tweet or any type of anything from Donald Trump saying, hey, guys, show up, we're going to do an insurrection? No, you just made the shit up.
Okay, fine. So I can. So as part of Donald Trump's speech, speech. I'll give you 2 quotes. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about. And to use a favorite term that all you people really came up with, we will stop the steal. Today, I will lay out just some of the evidence proving that we won this election. We won it by a landslide. This was not a close election. The first quote. The second quote, we must stop the steal, and then we must ensure that such outrageous election fraud never happens again, can never be allowed to happen again. When he says stop the steal, when they're at the Capitol building on January 6th, and when the election is being certified, what does stop the steal mean there?
Wait a second. So, first of all, you're attributing to Donald Trump's rhetoric here something which he may not have intended. None of that actually shows or demonstrates that he was calling for an insurrection on the Capitol. You are just kind of ascribing that motivation onto it for the purposes of convenience. You have to show me there where he calls, like your example was, if I say we're all going to show up and blow up this building, that was your example, and then people show up and do it, we can understand their motivation. I agree. You have to show me where he says, okay, guys, we're all going to show up and do an insurrection. You can't then take words that don't say anything about an insurrection and say, but I think he meant that, though.
So then just before I answer this, what would I have to show you to show that an insurrection was what Trump was planning? What kind of evidence would you need?
You would have to give me the criteria first and foremost of something which fit the criteria of an insurrection better than some other thing. And you would have to make it refutable to that thing from what people were charged under. So if the criteria is, I'm going to give you what I think an insurrection is, and it fits a different criteria better than an insurrection, and under that criteria, that's what people were basically charged under, then it sounds like the other thing makes more sense than an insurrection.
So are we going with the argument that for X event to have happened, X, like some person needs to have been charged with the crime?
No, your logic there is faulty as well.
Then why do you have the second element there for me proving?
Let me respond.
Well, hold on, you can't just talk for 20 minutes and then as soon as I say one sentence,
you can't ask me a question and then move to another question.
I can ask you a question and then ask another question as part of my question. I'm able
yeah, but I wasn't even able to respond.
You gave 2 elements to what I needed to prove. The second one was that I have to show why people weren't charged with a crime. I've answered this thing 50 million times. We can center on just as one point if you want. Just because somebody hasn't been charged with the crime of X doesn't mean that an event related to X didn't occur. This is true.
Yeah, but the opposite would equally be true. The opposite is also true. Just because they weren't charged with the crime of X doesn't mean they committed the crime of X either.
I'm not making that argument. You're using this argument as a way to negate my argument.
Yes.
Just because I'm not making
it's called a counter argument. Yes.
No, hold on. That would be like you saying John couldn't have murdered Jane because John wasn't there. And then I say, well, no, that's not true. And then you going, well, just because John was there doesn't mean that he murdered Jane.
Nope,
yeah,
the
that's
opposite.
Not the element that I'm giving.
The opposite is true.
I've given you 4 clear things.
Wait. No, wait. Hang on. The opposite is true.
An argument that, or give me a definition of insurrection. Or do you think it's
stop. Hang on. The opposite is true. I'm not saying that. So you say, oh, John murdered Jane. But that can't be true because he also may not have murdered Jane. You're making the claim John murdered Jane. And so I say, okay, that's your claim that he murdered Jane. Can you define for me what the criteria would be in which you would consider this to be murder? And you go, well, and then you define for me something that is not murder or fits some other criteria better. Would not a rational human being, including you,
halfway,
take that and understand, wait, if it fits this other criteria better, it probably isn't actually murder?
What part of my... Can you give me an example? I'm just curious, and I shouldn't even engage with this because so just up to this point, you've given me no definition of insurrection. You seem unwilling to commit.
It's not my burden.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just saying you've given me no definition of insurrection.
I'm giving you nothing.
So then my question would be, can you give me a riot? Can you give me a riot that would fit all 4 points that I've given of what I've defined in insurrection? Well, then you must accept my definition of insurrection.
I don't need to accept. Why would I need to accept your definition?
Because you're saying that my definition of insurrection isn't valid because it also applies to riots. And I'm telling you very clearly, no, it doesn't, because riots don't typically happen in a planned manner to contravene the execution of some government function or the implementation of some particular law.
That's not what your definition says. Your definition says under point 2, resisting
some
any
law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding.
Yeah, so you're just changing your definition.
I'm not resisting. Do you think that resisting a law is the same thing as breaking a law?
I think that it could be synonymous inside of people's minds, but no, I could see the distinction with merit. But when you say resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding, that sure sounds like a fucking riot to me, Destiny.
Okay, can you give me an example of a riot where that happens?
Where BLM burned down a police station. That seems like it's resisting the law.
Yeah, so that's... What law were they resisting the implementation of? What law?
The law of arson, the law of rioting, all sorts of laws.
So you're telling me that those riots were trying to make it so that arson was legal? Can you point me to a tweet? Can you point me to a statement where somebody was saying we're rioting because we think that the laws against arson
wait a
are
second.
illegal?
Can you show me in your definition where it says that the purpose of the insurrection is so that they can make something else legal? Because that's nowhere in your definition, Destiny.
Resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government
Doesn't say
proceeding.
anything
Yes.
about making something else legal. You just made it up.
No, you're saying that they're resisting the law of arson. Nobody's arguing that the law of arson is bad. Just because you're breaking a law doesn't
What's
mean you're
the or?
resisting
What's
the
the
law.
or? What's the or?
The or
3
for
minutes.
what?
3
It
minutes.
says
left.
or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. Would you not consider if somebody interfered with the FBI, for instance, for that to be interfering with the course of a government proceeding? Or if somebody interfered with police officers, that would be interfering with the course of a government proceeding?
Police officers are not federal police officers.
don't-
If you want to
but
talk about
federal's
interfering
not
with, if you want to
required.
talk about, if you want to, where you are, because we're talking about
It's
January
not.
6th.
We have your definition. It's not
Where
required.
did January 6th happen?
But it does. We have your definition.
Why would I be
Destiny.
arguing about the definition of an insurrection in a state when we're talking about an insurrection that happened?
Well, then
on the
can you
Capitol
show me in
grounds?
your definition where it says it must be federal for an
I
insurrection
don't need to.
occur?
We're talking about an
Well, then
insurrection
if
that
it
occurred on
doesn't,
federal
it doesn't
grounds.
matter. So then any of the criteria which would apply at the state level would still apply at the federal level for rioting. It's the same
I
thing.
don't know if insurrections are state defined. I'm not aware of that in the historical record.
Well,
Can
you can't
point
have a
somewhere
state
where you can-
insurrection. Why couldn't
I'm not
you?
aware of some. Can you show me where in the historical record? Where that's
I'm
ever
just
been
asking
stated?
why you couldn't have one.
Because I'm not aware of any having occurred
That
historically.
doesn't mean you couldn't have one.
You just claimed that it's possible.
I didn't make a
I'm
claim.
Oh, okay. Then we're not. No one is claiming here that an insurrection is.
No, you
possible.
are
Okay,
making
cool.
a
Gotcha.
claim.
All
You're
right.
making a claim on
I'm
your
making
4
a positive
points.
claim that there could be a federal
That's
insurrection
right.
because I have a historical record of there being statements about insurrections federally and historically. I've never had a statement about a state insurrection. I'm not aware of any of those. If
Yeah,
you are
but
aware of
you
one of
not
those,
being
feel free to
aware
tell
of
me.
any doesn't mean that the criteria could not apply to a state insurrection, correct?
That's correct, but we are talking
that's
about an
correct.
insurrection that happened on federal grounds, so we're
Yeah,
obviously
I
talking
agree,
about
but
federal
your definition
insurrections.
doesn't require federal anything. That's not what your
Okay, so we have
definition requires.
Okay, I think if this is if the only holdout you have is that your definition of resisting a particular law just means that you are breaking a law, then I think I'm satisfied.
No, it's not. Or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. This could be localized for
It
non-localized.
can't be. No one here has made
Yeah,
any
it
claims
can
about a
be.
non-federal insurrection. Okay, well, if those are your two holdouts that you
Well,
think
okay.
that
Well,
it's
what
a
is
laws that
or
is
what is
breaking the law,
or
or
interfering
that
with the course of a government proceeding mean?
1
What does
minute.
that mean?
The record that I'm invoking, we're especially talking about things relating to insurrection, and we're talking about the invocation of insurrection, which is my understanding has only ever happened in federal law and in stuff relating to the United States government, not a state government. If you want to show me it happening, or show me a historical record, or a state constitution, or a state criminal statute that references insurrection, then we can talk about that if you want to.
What does
We're arguing
or
about-
interfering with the course of a government proceeding mean, Destiny?
or interfering with the course of the implementation of the
30
execution
seconds.
of some particular federal law?
It has to be federal?
Yes, because we're talking about the federal government.
No,
We're
that
talking about
doesn't mean it.
insurrection.
Hang on. So
Yeah.
you're doing a classic kind of Destiny bait and switch, where you say in this particular case it would, because that's what we're talking about. Okay, that's fair, but that doesn't mean that that's what the definition says. The definition itself does not say that it must be federal. It
Who-
doesn't
you don't
say
even
that.
agree with my
Hang
what
on.
definition are you
It
even referring
doesn't
to
say
here?
that anywhere. What does or interfering with the course of a government
That is 10
proceeding
minutes.
mean? What does it mean?
That real quick, guys. That is 10 minutes. What I could do is, because I see that there's a discussion here between federal, if an insurrection can be federal or state, I will go ahead and reset the clock. I think maybe this is something that we can kind of hone in on. Can an insurrection be? Obviously, we're talking about it from federal level, but can also be at a state level. Do you guys want to shift that conversation to there and make this round specifically for that? Are you guys okay with that?
I don't know. I don't. State insurrection. I'm just not even aware of that even being a thing. I don't think I've ever heard
Well, I don't
of
know,
that.
Destiny. Were
so
the
I'll put
DC
clock
cops
for-
local?
I'll put the clock for 5 minutes.
DC
and we'll
cops were
do
federal.
this.
No, all of them were federal, eh?
The District of Columbia is federal.
So they
Yes,
have
it's federal.
no, they have no state police there at all.
What state police would they have there?
I don't know. I'm just asking.
I don't believe so. No, I'm pretty sure even
Okay.
the National Guard there directly, like the chain of command goes up to the president, not a
Do
state governor.
did states have state governments?
Yes.
Okay, well, I don't understand why you couldn't have an insurrection against a state government by this
You should
definition.
consult the historical record and come with an example next
Well,
time.
just because you never have one, I'm asking you if you can.
I'm not here to debate whether or not you can have an insurrection against a state government.
Well,
I'm here to
I
debate
don't
whether or not
understand
January
then
6th was
if
an
your
insurrection
definition doesn't
because
include
January
federal.
6th. No, this is like asking if a murder occurred on January 6th. In that case, I would only be talking about murder as it's defined in federal law, not in state law. We're talking about an insurrection on whether or not January 6th was an insurrection or not. So I'm only going to be appealing to federal law or federal historical understandings of an insurrection against the United States. So I don't know why we're saying, well, what about a state insurrection? I don't know. I'm not even aware if a state insurrection is a possible thing. I've never heard that reference before.
This is
it's not semantic. It's legal and it's historical, and that's where the understanding.
No, I'm fine with a semantic distinction. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm actually just trying to make one. So you agree that you gave me a definition that it nowhere includes the word federal, correct?
I also didn't give you a definition that includes the word human, or that includes the words like in this present point of time and not like in the future or time traveling in the past, or that doesn't include like dimension C138, or that like there's a million other things that I didn't include.
Yeah, I don't know what that has to do with anything.
Because why would I include the definition of against the United States when we're talking about an insurrection that happened on federal grounds?
Because
if you want, I could simply add. Okay, well in that case, I will simply add on my second.
Aren't you appealing to a state court, for instance? Like what are you talking about here?
Appealing to a state court for what?
Aren't you appealing to a state court for this definition? Isn't that what you said? Did I get that wrong?
I'm appealing to right now. I'm appealing to federal history. What are you talking about?
Well, I'm asking, where did you get this definition? Let's start with that.
There's a writer who studied I think it was constitutional law specializing in the 14th Amendment. His name is Mark Graber, and these are the 4 qualifications that he basically lists out, and then he goes through a number of historical examples to say as much. There's also a much longer paper written about the I think it's like the sweeping power of Section 3, written by I think Baud and Paulson, who write like a 130-page paper where they go through listing like the historical understanding of insurrection. If you want, we can dive through any part of the paper, or we can dive through any part of the definition.
Does he say in this paper that it's a requirement that this be done at the federal level?
I don't think anybody talks about state insurrections. I don't think you can levy war or engage in insurrection against a state. I'm just not aware of that. I've never heard of that brought up before.
Yeah, but I'm just
like for
asking.
instance, like when you say treason, if I were to give you a definition of treason, I don't know if you can commit treason against like the state of Iowa. I think that's only a federal crime.
I have no idea either. This is why I'm asking.
I can't say for sure because maybe there is evidence of it out there, but I don't know. Prepared to debate that because there's a debate about federal.
All I'm doing is doing an internal critique to try to figure out if this is consistent across the board. Your definition. I'm not even saying that there's necessarily anything wrong with it, but what I am saying is that there's something wrong with the fact that it seems to fit rioting far better than it would in insurrection. So if we go over these one at a time. An assemblage would fit a riot. That's what Destiny says. By force or intimidation fits a riot. That's what Destiny says.
An assemblage of people for a common purpose.
Yeah.
Okay. An assemblage of people. Yes.
Riot.
So they've come for a common purpose. Okay. And then 2 is to resist any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. Right. Resisting a law. That's not just breaking a law, but you're there to resist a particular law. There's one you really don't like. And then 3, you're showing up.
Yeah, but wait, we have the or there. We have the or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. Wouldn't that be even resisting police? Wouldn't that qualify for that?
No, a government proceeding would be like the Senate confirming like an officer of the executive agency.
You would have to demonstrate that. I don't believe that that's true. I think that you can interfere with government proceedings, even absent there being some actual proceeding that you're interfering with. I think that
if you would like to introduce
localized laws.
That's fine. And if you would like to introduce your own unique definition of insurrection, you can do that.
Why would I need to do that? We have
because I'm unaware in the historical record of anybody suggesting that interfering with police officers is a matter of insurrection or can lead to an element of insurrection.
Are there laws against rioting?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I know there's laws against like things that happen in rioting. I don't know if there's like a law of rioting.
Are you resisting those laws when you're rioting?
No.
You're not resisting those laws when you're rioting?
No, unless you're literally rioting to say we should make rioting legal or we need to get rid of the prohibition on rioting.
And that is 5 minutes.
Why would that be a qualification to resist the laws?
Because breaking the law and do you acknowledge that breaking the law and resisting the law are not the same
Well, tell me what the distinction is so I'm not confused anymore.
Breaking the law is when you do something that's illegal, and resisting the law is saying that this particular law shouldn't exist.
Yeah, okay, but if you're rioting, how do you go about resisting a law?
Well, you could riot for the purpose of overturning a particular law. You might say,
but
I
you're
don't
resisting other laws then, right?
No, you're not. You're not saying that rioting should be made legal.
Yeah, but even if you weren't, you would still be resisting laws that were on the books against rioting.
So if I can't divorce, okay, we can just disagree here. If you think that resisting and breaking the law are the same thing, we're at an impasse.
I didn't say that they're the same thing. I said that necessarily, if you're rioting to resist some other external law. So let's say I think that
hold on. Do you agree? Do you agree that you can engage in rioting? No. Do you agree that you can engage in rioting and accept that you might get arrested for rioting?
Yeah.
Then that defeats your entire argument. You can engage in rioting without resisting the law of rioting. Understand that? Well, I'm going to riot, but I might be arrested
that makes my argument. That makes my argument. So the thing is that even if I concede that it's true, that you could be, rioting with the expectation that you get arrested for this X thing, right? You could do this for murder as well. You could do this for basically anything. You could commit any crime with the expectation that you could be arrested for the crime itself. But that would not say that you're not resisting whatever the current laws were that were on the books about that crime. You're saying that the necessity here is that you are resisting some other thing. Fine. But you're also resisting laws by the very nature of rioting. So I don't know why you would have to have something which is externalized while you yourself are still breaking laws. I don't think.
How are you resisting the law? How are you resisting laws of rioting by rioting? Well, what does resist mean to you there? How are you defining resist?
Yeah. So assuming, I can give you an example of this. Let us assume for a second that people are rioting in an abortion clinic because they want abortion overturned. I think this is the spirit of your argument, right? So they're rioting in an abortion clinic. They want abortion to be overturned. You would agree with me then that they are pushing against abortion, but they're still breaking laws while they're rioting, right? So they are resisting current laws, even though they're resisting another current law. And I don't think that you would consider that to be an insurrection, even though it could fit all of the criteria of these elements. It's an assemblage, for sure. You're resisting some other law that you don't like, or you're interfering with the course of a government proceeding. You would say that that fits criteria too. You would say that this is by force or intimidation, and you would say it's for a public purpose. But that clearly is not an insurrection, Destiny.
The issue is that like abortion is not like this isn't a federal law. I could just grant you that we can move to the state example since you seem unable or unwilling to differentiate.
Let's assume for a second that it was. Let's assume for a second it was a federal law.
Okay, you know what? Actually, we can do that. Let's say that the federal government passed a law either allowing or not allowing all abortion. Okay, the government either allows it, everybody can have an abortion whenever they want, or nobody can have an abortion. Okay, let's say that I gather a group of people and I say, listen, okay, fuck this abortion law. We're all going to get together and we're going to go protest. Okay, and we're protesting. The goal of our protest, all right, is we want to get rid of the abortion thing, whether it was passed or made illegal. Okay, we want to get rid of this law, and we're going to show up with a whole bunch of fucking people, and shit's going to get rowdy, and we're going to, we know what we're doing. Okay, it's the day that in Capitol Hill that they're going to sign the law into whatever. We march down there, and in the course of protesting, like it becomes a riot, and the riot and everything there was because of that particular law being signed into practice. I would say, yeah, that was an insurrection. You've shown up with a group of people. You're resisting the passage of some particular law. You're showing up through force or intimidation, and you end up exercising that, and then it's for the public purpose of a particular law that impacts everybody in the United States. I would say that is an insurrection. Yes. Would you say it's not?
So if a
would you
bunch
say that
of
that's
people,
not an insurrection?
Yeah, I would say that it would not be an insurrection, at least by this criteria. That would just seem to me, again, to be a riot. That would seem to fit the criteria, again, of a riot better than an insurrection. I still can't exactly figure out the delineation point, and I'm trying to. And now, to be fair to you, it is nebulous. I understand it's nebulous, but I'm also not the one who's making the affirmative claim. You are. So you're saying that if a bunch of fucking dope smoking hippies wanted to resist the federal law of being able to smoke marijuana on federal land, and they all showed up and they got stoned, and then they started rioting, that would be a fucking insurrection?
If they went there with a common purpose, they were trying to resist the implementation or execution of a particular law. Yeah, theoretically it could.
Well, no, they're just resisting, right? They're just resisting a law. They're saying, we're here to protest the fact, man, that we can't smoke weed on federal property, man. So they all grab their blunts and they start toking up in protest.
10 seconds.
Right? And then they start a fire.
What do you have?
And kick some stuff.
Do you think
hang on, I just want to make sure. You think
It could be, yes.
That would be
yes.
an insurrection.
The historical record, it could be, yes. Do you have any definition of insurrection whatsoever? Or do you
don't need to give you a counter definition.
If you're not going to give me a counter definition, I can give you the riot definition doesn't include necessarily a public purpose. I've already given examples of riots that wouldn't fit my definition of insurrection, and I really only need to give one, and I automatically win. A riot could very much be in response to a particular sports team winning a game. Boom. That's an example of a riot. It doesn't fit my definition of an insurrection. I've differentiated between the two, and unless you're going to give me any countervailing definitions, I automatically satisfy that element.
Yeah, but I already did.
Claim,
We're interfering with the course of a government proceeding in and of itself. I think that the necessity of rioting in and of itself. What if you blockade a federal highway?
Wait, the necessity of rioting in and of itself. Wait, what?
I think,
no,
yeah,
hold on, wait. To be clear,
rioting,
do you acknowledge that I just gave you? Do you acknowledge that I just gave you an example of a riot that wouldn't be an insurrection under my definitions?
So I think that would even be appropriate. I think that you could give me tons of definitions of riots that would not fit this definition of an insurrection, but that would not mean that this definition doesn't fit the definition of riot better than insurrection. You understand?
Wait, so if somebody was protesting and it got really violent after a sports game, how would my definition fit that better than insurrection fit that?
Well, what if they were blockading a federal highway? Would that be interfering with the course of government proceedings because there's a federal law that says you can't blockade byways on federal highways? I mean, this is the thing. Is that
I don't know. I don't think that counts as a proceeding.
Do you see what I mean, though? This becomes so broad that we can begin to just add all sorts of things and call them insurrections.
What is the government proceeding?
Let me give you an example. So if we're going to be totally good faith here, right, which I've been trying to be this entire debate, and I think you would concede that, if we're going to be really good faith here, do you really believe that if a bunch of hippies showed up to smoke a bunch of dope on federal property, okay, and a few of them got wild and started a fire and kicked some shit, right? And fucking, I don't know, somebody got beat up with a bat because there was tens of thousands of them who showed up for that protest. Do you really believe that that would fit the criteria of what most people think of, including you, as an insurrection?
If they didn't go there united by like a particular public purpose,
the public purpose was they were going against this federal law. They don't want the federal law. They're resisting that federal law.
So that we don't have to waste more time on this. If you want to stack this enough, all I'm going to end up doing is saying that, like, yes, this would agree as I would agree that this would be an insurrection. You have it. You're not able to demonstrate. This is why I'm asking you, like, historically, can you give me an example of an event that you don't think I would want to classify as an insurrection?
I don't think
that would
I need
classify
to because
as
I
an
think,
insurrection. But
so
if you're just going to give me examples, but you're just
don't need to. Well, here I can give. I'm going to give you the ultimate example right now.
Yeah, I would say that was an insurrection.
Nobody in good faith anywhere is going to agree with you that if a bunch of hippies showed up to resist the marijuana law on federal property and then a few of them started a riot, that they would consider that insurrection against the United States. I don't believe you believe it. I don't believe your audience believes it. I don't believe anybody believes it. So if that is the case, that it's so broad that will encapsulate that, I'm actually fine leaving the debate there too.
Okay. I mean, again, it doesn't really matter what we would consider to be an insurrection. The only thing that really matters is what the historical record says at the time was considered an insurrection.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Again, I literally nobody's think prosecuting anybody for it, so
you don't have to. Well, you're just retreading. Technically, I think this might be a gish gallows when you keep bringing up arguments that have been rebuked over and over and over again.
I don't think
you can keep bringing it up over and over and over again. But again, we agree that, like, we can walk in and see, wow, this person was murdered, and go, oh, really? Who was charged with murder? Okay, fuck. Or wow, there sure is a riot here. We saw that a riot happened. Well, who was charged with rioting? Oh, fuck, I guess. Like, you don't need a charge of a particular crime, and the barrier or the bar for charging somebody with a particular crime is probably a lot higher than declaring an event a thing itself. It doesn't make any sense to say because somebody hasn't been charged with a particular thing.
It also doesn't make any sense to say that
we're not talking about criminal charges.
It also doesn't make any sense to say that because they haven't been charged with a particular thing, that means they're guilty of the particular thing either. That's the flaw in that argument. I've pointed it out multiple times. Your criteria doesn't actually flow with this correctly.
My criteria is not because they weren't charged. That's why it was an insurrection. I would never use that as part of my criteria. I don't know.
Yeah, well, hippies everywhere don't show up to federal property to protest by smoking weed, and because if a couple of you start a fire, you're going to get brought up on insurrection charges, and nobody ever. That's insane.
We're not. No, I don't know why we keep bringing up insurrection charges. No one's talking about a criminal charge or a criminal proceeding here.
Yeah, criminal charge or criminal proceeding. That would be a charge, right? That's why.
Yeah, nobody's talking about that here. Nobody's talking about criminal charges here or criminal proceedings here.
So but you would still consider that an insurrection, right?
An insurrection doesn't have to be a criminal matter.
I just want to make sure that you would still consider that an insurrection.
If all four elements of what I said were met, then yes.
All right, fine. Well, then I'll leave the debate there. I'm good with that.
So what I'll do, so we went 7 rounds here, and I was just timing it and everything else like that. I see that there's obviously a difference of opinion in definitions of what fits what, etc. So what I'll do is I'll go to closing arguments. I'll put, are you both okay with 3 minutes on the clock to make your closing argument? Or
Sure.
I can make it a little bit longer if you guys want, and then we can close that after that.
Yeah, whatever you guys want to do. I'm
Destiny,
fine
are you okay with 3 or do you want more?
3's probably fine.
3 minutes? Okay. Who wants to go first?
Well, I opened first, so usually the person who opens closes last.
Okay. So, Destiny, I'll turn it to you. I'll put 3 minutes on the clock, and you can put your closing arguments here. And this was a fantastic discussion. Obviously, you know you have a good debate when the chat is like, if almost 50-50. So I'll go ahead and turn it to you, Destiny, and you can give us your closing arguments, and then I'll go turn it to Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, historically, like there have been examples of things that were considered insurrections that were incredibly small in nature, right? I don't know if anybody died at all in the Whiskey Rebellion. I'm pretty sure everybody that got arrested for that was like acquitted. It was just people basically essentially protesting the whiskey tax laws. This wasn't a massive deal that had like explosions and gunfire and deaths everywhere. I think that we just don't tend to view things as insurrections as much anymore because we don't tend to have insurrections as much anymore because that's kind of become the new norm as the United States has, traveled through or journeyed through time. I think that the 4 elements that I gave, I think were pretty clearly met on January 6th. I think I've demonstrated that we can imagine a ton of events that are riots that wouldn't fit the 4 elements. I understand that Andrew has a really hard time understanding the difference between resisting a law versus just breaking a law. Just because somebody goes out and they engage in rioting doesn't mean that they are trying to resist the law of rioting, that they're trying to make it so that rioting is legal, that that's the goal of that particular riot. Oftentimes, riots can be said to come together to protest other types of things where people feel like the law isn't being executed in a reasonable manner. To say that a bunch of people that show up and end up rioting as a result of a protest that's against, like, say, a cop they feel like wasn't fairly prosecuted is the same as a bunch of people showing up to resist the certification of the vote as laid out in the Electoral Count Act is just not at all the same thing. But we can continue to misread the second element of this, and I understand why, and that's because if you grant the definition or any definition of insurrection, January 6th almost certainly follows from it. And the only way to escape January 6th as being labeled as an insurrection is to use either a ridiculous type of definition that literally nobody historically has ever agreed to. And again, you will never find historical citations, people that use these very unique and contrived definitions of insurrection, or you set the bar of evidence as being unbelievably high, which is saying something like Donald Trump needed to say, hey, everybody, we're going to go do an insurrection. And absent that, even if he's telling people to fight like hell, even if he's tweeting the day before, Vice President Pence has the ability to overturn the election, even if he's saying, like, we need to go down and march and fight like hell and take our country back. None of these things are going to matter if they don't actually use the word insurrection, which I guess means there's no such thing as an insurrection ever having occurred in all of U.S. history. I would say that if you argue with somebody who doesn't believe in a particular definition of insurrection, ask them, has any insurrection ever occurred ever? Which would you consider an insurrection? And then once they start to consider something as an insurrection, say, hey, well, what are the elements that make this an insurrection? Or even more, you could say, historically, what have judges and lawmakers considered an insurrection? People like Andrew will never do that. Instead, they will just play word games all day and try to say, well, riots fit, and what about states and all these other things that aren't really relevant to defining an insurrection, which, however you define it, January 6th clearly was.
All right. Okay. That was 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I will turn it to you, Andrew, to make your closing arguments. And then, Andrew, from what I understand, you wanted to open up the phone lines, right, and have a discussion with the people after?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Even if Destiny has other places to go, I'm willing to stick around for call-ins. I've always done that on the Crucible.
Sure.
I'm
sure there's people. Right now, as we speak, Bills is firing up the phone line, so we'll get that phone number out and put it on the screen, and you guys can, Destiny, if you want to stay, you can telegraph it to your audience, and we can answer some questions for the people. But I will turn it to you, Andrew, to make your closing arguments. 3 minutes.
Yeah, well, it's really funny, this appeal to authority. Destiny grabs this entire nebulous definition from some guy that he respects on the internet and then claims that this is some authoritative definition. This is the authoritative definition because I read it from some guy on the internet. Oh, okay, great. Even though the courts themselves have not ruled on this, and nobody was charged with insurrection. Nobody was charged. Again, one more time, nobody charged with insurrection. Trump acquitted of inciting an insurrection, which, again, nobody was charged with. Talk about nebulous definition. He says, I'm playing word games. Meanwhile, he takes time today, all day, to assemble a 4-point, this is my definition, completely based on some other guy on the internet, which is crazy to me, right? This is Destiny's personal definition of what this means. And it clearly fits 3 of the criteria for rioting right off the gate. We only had an issue with 2. And then when we apply these, and remember my opening statement, I said in my opening statement, this is going to become very broad, right? There's no way that we're not going to be able to call all sorts of things insurrections that clearly are not insurrections. We come up with the idea of what if a bunch of dope smoking hippies all show up with the united purpose of smoking dope on federal land in order to resist the federal law. And then a couple of them start a fire and one gets beaten up with a baseball bat or something like this. Suddenly that's an insurrection. Clearly, nobody would think that that was an insurrection. Clearly, nobody would think that that's a completely unreasonable standard, right? But it's the Destiny standard. And the reason, again, that he had to have such a broad definition, the reason that he needed this, and he needed me to come in and give him some definition he could do an internal critique on, is because his idea that this was an insurrection is only there specifically to villainize the opposition for the purposes of demonization, so that when bad things happen to them, he can call them traitors. That's it. That's the whole game. It's been his whole game now for a while, and this is what got him on Pierce and all these other things, which I recently reviewed, was that take. And so in order for him to justify that take, he has to make you a traitor because you don't believe that that was an insurrection that nobody was charged with.
Okay, 2:15. Guys, that was fucking fantastic discussion. Obviously people are going to have different viewpoints on where they go, but that's, I think, the beauty of any discussion like this in debate, that it, good debate always has people with different viewpoints saying like, oh, I think this guy did better, I think this guy did better. So great.